Marcus Anderson was an ordinary 13-year-old boy with big dreams. He loved playing basketball, hanging out with his friends, and spending time with his family. He had always felt like he belonged at Greenfield Middle School, where he was known for being kind-hearted and respectful. His teachers liked him, and he had a small group of close friends who always had his back. But this year was going to be different. Marcus's dad, Mr. Anderson, had just been appointed as the new principal of the school. This news was exciting for Marcus, but it also made him nervous. He couldn't help but wonder how things would change now that his father was in charge. Would his friends think he was different? Would his teachers treat him differently? Marcus's dad, Principal Anderson, was a well-respected educator who had spent years working at different schools. He had earned a reputation for being fair and compassionate, always wanting the best for his students. Marcus admired his dad a lot, but at the same time, he wasn't sure how people at school would feel about him being the principal's son. Would they treat him like a regular student, or would they expect more from him, just because of his dad's new position? As Marcus walked through the hallways on the first day of school, he couldn't help but notice how different things felt. Students looked at him more than usual, some with curiosity, others with excitement. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the whispers in the hallway only made him feel more self-conscious. "There goes the principal's kid," some of his classmates would whisper as he passed by. It made Marcus feel awkward, as if he was under a microscope. In his first class of the day, Marcus took a deep breath as he walked into Miss Thompson's classroom. Miss Thompson was a teacher who had been at Greenfield for years, but she wasn't known for being the friendliest teacher. Some of the students joked about her being tough to please, and Marcus had heard rumors that she didn't always treat everyone equally. Still, he hoped that his first day would go smoothly. As he settled into his seat in the back of the classroom, Marcus tried to relax and focus on the lesson. But something about Miss Thompson's gaze made him uncomfortable. She didn't seem to smile as much as other teachers did. He remembered how his friends had warned him about her, that she could be a little strict and not always understanding, especially to students who were different from others. While Marcus tried to stay focused, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the whispers in the hallway or the strange looks he was getting. It was the way people treated him differently because of his father's new role. Marcus hoped that, as time went on, things would settle down and he could go back to being just a regular student at Greenfield Middle School, not the principal's son. But little did he know, his life was about to take an unexpected turn, and the changes at school would come in ways he never imagined. What started as a simple adjustment to his dad's new job would soon lead to a shocking moment that would change everything. Miss Thompson had always been known as a no-nonsense teacher. She was strict and expected her students to follow the rules, which wasn't always easy for some kids. Many students didn't enjoy being in her class because of her tough attitude, but there were also those who admired her for being straightforward and fair. To Marcus, she was just another teacher he had to deal with, but little did he know, their first encounter would make things complicated. Marcus had heard stories from his friends about Miss Thompson's classroom. Some students said she didn't always seem to understand what it was like to be different, especially if you didn't fit into the group she liked. There were rumors that she had a tendency to be unfair, especially when it came to students from different backgrounds. Marcus, being one of the few black kids in his class, had always wondered if he would be treated the same way. He didn't want to judge her too quickly, but he couldn't help feeling a little nervous. The first week of school was always a mix of excitement and nerves, and Miss Thompson's class was no different. Marcus noticed that she didn't smile much. When she did speak, her words were sharp, as though she was always annoyed by something. Sometimes, she would make little comments that made Marcus feel uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. One day after lunch, Marcus walked into the classroom late. He had been chatting with his friends in the hallway, and by the time he realized the bell had rung, he rushed to his seat. As he walked in, he noticed the room was unusually quiet, and all eyes seemed to be on him. Miss Thompson didn't waste any time. "Marcus, you're late again," she said in a cold voice. "Maybe you should learn how to manage your time better." Marcus quickly apologized, his face turning red. He had never been late before, but he didn't want to argue with her. He settled into his seat, hoping the incident would be forgotten. But then, Miss Thompson said something that caught him off guard. "You know, you really need to start cleaning yourself up," she said, raising her eyebrows. "You smell like you haven't showered in days. Maybe it's time you start taking better care of yourself." The words hit Marcus like a slap in the face. He felt his heart race and his face burn with embarrassment. He had always taken pride in being neat and clean, and to have Miss Thompson make such a comment in front of the whole class made him feel humiliated. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. The students around him shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them giggled, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Marcus, however, just sat there, feeling a lump form in his throat. He didn't want to cry in front of everyone, but he couldn't help feeling hurt. Was it because of his race, or was it just a random comment? As the class continued, Marcus tried to focus on the lesson, but his mind kept going back to what had just happened. He was so upset that he couldn't concentrate. He glanced at Miss Thompson from time to time, but she seemed unfazed by the tension she had caused. He didn't know what to do. He had never been treated like this before, and he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Marcus had a gut feeling that Miss Thompson's words weren't just about being late. There was something else there, something unspoken, and he wasn't sure how to deal with it. As the bell rang to signal the end of class, Marcus grabbed his things and rushed out the door. He didn't want to stay and face the awkward silence, but little did he know, this moment would mark the beginning of something much bigger, a moment that would test his courage and change his life in ways he never expected. The rest of the day was a blur for Marcus. He couldn't stop thinking about what Miss Thompson had said to him earlier. Her words echoed in his mind like a bad song he couldn't get out of his head. "You smell like you haven't showered in days." Why did she say that? He didn't smell. He had showered this morning, just like he did every day. He kept asking himself if it had anything to do with his skin color, or if it was just her being rude. Either way, he felt uncomfortable and upset. When the final bell rang at the end of the school day, Marcus was eager to get home. He needed to talk to someone about what had happened, but he wasn't sure who. He didn't want to tell his mom yet because she would probably get really mad, and he didn't want to worry her. He thought about telling his best friend, Jamal, but Jamal had been talking to someone else after class, and Marcus didn't feel like waiting around. As he walked home, the thoughts swirled in his mind. He knew something wasn't right, but he wasn't sure how to fix it. It felt like Miss Thompson had tried to make him feel small in front of everyone, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He hadn't said anything during class because he didn't want to make a scene, but the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Why should he have to feel like this at school? When he got home, his dad, Principal Anderson, was still at work. Marcus didn't want to talk to his mom about it just yet, so he sat down on the couch and tried to relax. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Miss Thompson's face and heard her words. It was hard to shake the feeling that he was being unfairly singled out. That evening, Marcus tried to act normal. He ate dinner with his family and even played a video game with his little brother, but his mind kept drifting back to that moment in class. What if Miss Thompson really didn't like him because of his race? He hated the idea that something like that could happen at school, a place where he should feel safe. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he couldn't just ignore it. The next morning, Marcus woke up early. He had barely slept the night before, and he felt tired and frustrated. As he got dressed, he noticed how his uniform was neatly pressed and how clean he looked. He couldn't understand how anyone could think he didn't take care of himself. He wasn't perfect, but he made an effort every day. It was then that he decided he would talk to someone about what happened. After breakfast, Marcus walked to school with his mom. He wanted to tell her what happened, but he still wasn't sure how to start. As they neared the school, Marcus stopped and turned to his mom. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice shaking. She looked at him with concern. "What's wrong, Marcus?" For the first time, Marcus told his mom everything that happened in Miss Thompson's class. He told her about being late, about the comment Miss Thompson made, and how it made him feel. His mom listened carefully, her face serious. After he finished, she gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Marcus," she said softly, "I'm proud of you for telling me. We're going to take care of this, okay?" Marcus felt a little better, but deep down, he knew that telling his mom was just the first step. He had no idea what would happen next, but he was about to find out. The next few days would change everything for him and his family in ways they never expected. The next morning, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with his mom. Telling her had helped, but it also made him feel more anxious. He wasn't sure what would happen next, and part of him worried that speaking up would only make things worse. What if people at school found out he had complained about Miss Thompson? Would they think he was weak? Would she get mad at him? As Marcus walked through the school gates, his nerves grew. He had never been one to cause trouble, but now he felt like he was in the middle of something bigger than he ever imagined. The faces of his classmates seemed to stare at him with curiosity, and he tried his best to avoid eye contact. He just wanted the day to go by quickly so he could forget about what had happened. But that didn't happen. When Marcus entered the school building, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The halls felt different, colder. Maybe it was just his imagination, but he felt like people were watching him more than usual. Was he overthinking it? Or was this how it felt when you decided to speak up? As he entered his first class of the day, Marcus saw Miss Thompson at her desk. She didn't look any different, but Marcus couldn't forget the words she had said to him. He sat down in his seat quietly, trying to stay focused. The bell rang, and Miss Thompson began the lesson as usual, but Marcus's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't concentrate on the lesson. All he could think about was how unfair it felt. Why had she treated him that way? Was it because he was different? During a quiet moment in the class, Marcus raised his hand. Miss Thompson looked at him, clearly surprised. Marcus had never been one to speak out in class, so this moment felt different. "Miss Thompson," he began, his voice a little shaky, "I need to talk to you after class." She nodded, but her expression was unreadable. As the bell rang and the other students quickly left, Marcus stayed behind, unsure of how to begin. He took a deep breath, gathered his thoughts, and then spoke up. "Miss Thompson," he said, looking directly at her, "I didn't like what you said to me yesterday. You told me I smelled, but I take care of myself. I shower every day, and that comment hurt me." Miss Thompson seemed taken aback, almost surprised that Marcus was saying something. For a moment, she didn't speak. She looked at him with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Marcus," she finally said, "I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a joke." "I don't think it was a joke," Marcus said quietly, feeling the lump in his throat grow. "It made me feel bad, and I think you should know that." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Marcus thought Miss Thompson might dismiss him. But instead, she nodded slowly. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, not sounding entirely convinced, but at least acknowledging his feelings. Marcus felt a small sense of relief, but he wasn't done yet. He knew the conversation wasn't enough to make everything better. And he couldn't let it go. He had to tell someone else about what happened. After class, Marcus walked straight to the school counselor's office. He had never gone to the counselor before, but he knew he couldn't keep everything inside. As he entered the office, he was greeted by Ms. Walker, the counselor, who smiled warmly at him. She could tell something was bothering him. "Marcus, what's on your mind?" she asked gently. Marcus took a deep breath, and for the first time, he told her everything. He explained how Ms. Thompson's comment had hurt him and how he didn't know what to do about it. Ms. Walker listened closely, her expression serious. When he finished, she nodded. "Marcus," she said, "I'm glad you came to talk to me. We'll take care of this, okay? You did the right thing by speaking up." Marcus felt a little better knowing someone else understood, but deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Something needed to change, and he hoped the adults at the school would take his complaint seriously. Little did he know, the chain of events that had just started would lead to a confrontation that would change everything. The following morning, Marcus walked into school with a feeling of unease. The conversation with the counselor the day before had left him with a small sense of relief, but there was still a heavy weight on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what would happen now that he had reported Ms. Thompson's behavior. Would she get angry? Would the school do anything about it? Would things get worse for him? As he walked down the hallway, he noticed the usual bustle of students. Some were talking with friends, others were heading to their next class. But for Marcus, everything felt different now. The whispers, the glances, even the way the teachers seemed to look at him made him feel out of place. It wasn't just because his dad was the new principal. No, it was more than that. It was the feeling of being under a microscope, of being judged by others in ways he didn't deserve. He hadn't expected the incident with Miss Thompson to grow into something bigger, but Marcus soon realized that his decision to speak up was about to lead him into uncharted waters. As he sat down in his first class of the day, he saw Ms. Thompson walk in, looking as stern as always. She didn't seem to notice Marcus, but he couldn't help but feel that there was a tension in the air between them. The class began, but Marcus couldn't focus on the lesson. His thoughts were racing. Would he get a chance to speak with her again? Would she act differently toward him now that he had reported her behavior? After a few minutes, the classroom door opened, and Principal Anderson walked in. He was the last person Marcus had expected to see in Ms. Thompson's classroom. His father had been working late the night before, so Marcus assumed he would be busy with his new role as principal. But here he was, standing in the doorway with a serious expression on his face. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. His dad never visited classes unless it was important. He tried to hide his surprise, hoping that no one would notice his connection to the principal. But as he looked around the room, he saw that some of the other students were whispering and glancing at him. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," Principal Anderson said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to have a word with you." Miss Thompson looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting the principal to be there. "Of course, Mr. Anderson," she said, standing up from her desk. "What can I do for you?" As the two of them stepped outside the classroom for a private conversation, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what this was about. He didn't want to eavesdrop, but he couldn't stop himself from feeling uneasy. What if his dad had somehow learned about the conversation he had with the counselor? Would he get into trouble for speaking up? Or was something else going on? Marcus sat quietly in his seat, trying to appear normal, but his mind raced with questions. He had no idea that his father had already been informed about the situation with Miss Thompson, and that his actions would soon have a direct impact on the teacher. What he didn't know was that Principal Anderson had already been made aware of the complaint, and he had taken it very seriously. As Marcus waited, he began to feel a growing sense of anxiety. He had hoped that the situation would be resolved quietly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. For better or worse, he was about to learn how his dad's new role as principal would affect not just his own life, but also the way others treated him at school. The door to the classroom opened again, and Marcus looked up to see both his father and Miss Thompson returning. The conversation was over, but Marcus could tell that things were far from settled. The tension in the air seemed thicker now, and he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger story that was still unfolding. That afternoon, Marcus sat in his room after school, trying to concentrate on his homework, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to what had happened that morning. His father, Principal Anderson, had stepped into Miss Thompson's classroom, and now Marcus couldn't stop wondering what they had discussed. Was his dad upset? Had he found out about Marcus talking to the counselor? What was going to happen next? Later that evening, When Marcus was finishing his dinner, his dad came home from work. He looked tired but happy. His mom greeted him with a smile and a kiss on the cheek. "How was your day, dear?" she asked as she handed him a plate of food. "It was good," Principal Anderson said, taking a seat at the table. He looked over at Marcus and noticed the look on his son's face. "How about you, Marcus? How was your day at school?" Marcus forced a smile but couldn't bring himself to answer. He didn't want to tell his dad what had happened, at least not yet. He felt like he was betraying Miss Thompson, even though she had made him feel so uncomfortable. Still, his dad's job as the principal made everything complicated. His mom noticed Marcus's hesitation. "Is everything okay?" she asked, giving him a concerned look. "You seem a little off." Marcus sighed and put down his fork. "It's about Miss Thompson," he said, his voice quiet. "She said something to me yesterday in class, something that hurt my feelings." Principal Anderson's eyes softened when he heard his son's words. He had always told Marcus that he could come to him about anything, but Marcus had been too nervous to speak up earlier. Now he felt the weight of his father's role and the responsibility it carried. "What did she say, Marcus?" his dad asked, his tone gentle but serious. Marcus hesitated, unsure of how to explain. But finally, he told his dad about the comment Miss Thompson had made in class. "She said I smelled," Marcus explained, "but I take care of myself. I shower every day, and I just don't understand why she said that." Principal Anderson listened carefully, his expression turning serious. He knew that his son had every right to feel upset. "I'm really sorry, Marcus. That shouldn't have happened," he said, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. "You did the right thing by telling your mom and going to the counselor." Marcus felt a little relieved, but he was still nervous. "What's going to happen now?" he asked, glancing at his dad. "Well, I spoke with Miss Thompson this morning," Principal Anderson said. "I've made sure she understands how serious this situation is. I'll be following up with her, but I want to assure you that things will be handled appropriately." Marcus wasn't sure what that meant, but hearing his dad say that made him feel a little better. Still, he was anxious about how things would unfold at school the next day. He wasn't sure if Miss Thompson would treat him any differently, or if the other students would start looking at him strangely. His dad, sensing Marcus's unease, gave him a reassuring smile. "I know this is tough, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here to support you, and I'll make sure this is taken care of." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling comforted by his dad's words. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, he felt confident that speaking up had been the right choice. He had his father's support, and that made all the difference. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he realized that things at school might not be the same anymore. But he was no longer afraid. He had taken a stand, and no matter what happened next, he was ready to face it. He just hoped that the days ahead would bring change. Not just for him, but for everyone at Greenfield Middle School. The next morning, Marcus walked into school with a nervous feeling in his stomach. He had no idea what to expect. His dad, Principal Anderson, had spoken to Miss Thompson the day before, but Marcus wasn't sure how she would react. Would she be angry with him? Would she treat him differently now that she knew he had gone to the counselor? He couldn't help but feel a little anxious as he walked down the hallway. As he passed by the other students, some gave him quick glances, while others whispered to each other. Marcus tried to ignore it. He had already been the center of attention when the news about his dad's new job spread, but now it felt even more intense. People were beginning to notice the tension in the air, and it made Marcus feel uneasy. When Marcus entered Miss Thompson's class, he saw her standing at the front, talking to a group of students. She didn't seem to notice him right away, but as he walked to his seat, their eyes met. She gave him a small nod, and Marcus felt his heart race. He wasn't sure what to expect from her now. Was she going to apologize? Was she going to act like nothing had happened? As class began, Miss Thompson started with her usual lesson, but Marcus couldn't focus. His mind kept racing, trying to guess what would happen next. It wasn't until later in the class, when the students were working quietly, that Miss Thompson finally addressed the issue. "Marcus," she said, her voice a little quieter than usual, "can you stay after class for a moment?" Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was happening, he wasn't sure what to say. He nodded silently, wondering what she was going to say. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and the other students filed out. Marcus stayed in his seat, feeling both nervous and uncertain. When the classroom was empty, Miss Thompson walked over to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, and Marcus felt his palms begin to sweat. Finally, Miss Thompson broke the silence. "Marcus," she began, looking at him with a serious expression, "I want to apologize for what I said yesterday. I realize now that my comment was inappropriate and hurtful. That was not my intention, and I deeply regret making you feel uncomfortable." Marcus was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to apologize so directly. Her words seemed sincere, but he wasn't sure if they were truly coming from the heart or if she was just trying to save face. Still, he appreciated the apology. It wasn't easy for someone to admit they were wrong, especially in front of the person they had hurt. I appreciate your apology, Miss Thompson," Marcus said, his voice quieter than usual. "But it still really hurt. I didn't deserve to be treated that way." Miss Thompson nodded, her face softening. "I understand, and I want you to know that I will do better. I've learned a valuable lesson from this, and I will work hard to ensure it doesn't happen again." Marcus wasn't sure what to say next. He didn't want to hold a grudge, but it was hard to forget how her comment had made him feel. Still, he could tell that she was genuinely trying to make things right. "I'm glad you understand," Marcus said after a pause. "I just want to feel respected, like everyone else. I promise you, Marcus, I will treat you with the respect you deserve from now on," Miss Thompson said, her voice steady. As Marcus left the classroom, he felt a mixture of emotions. Part of him was relieved that the confrontation was over, but another part of him was still unsure about what to expect from Miss Thompson moving forward. He had spoken up for himself, and he was proud of that, but he also knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. As he walked down the hallway toward his next class, he realized that this was just one step in a much larger journey. Standing up for himself had been the right choice, and he hoped that, over time, his school would become a better place for everyone. Not just for him, but for all students, no matter their background. The days following Marcus's confrontation with Miss Thompson felt strange. He wasn't sure if he should feel proud of himself for standing up for what was right, or if he should be worried about what would happen next. Though Miss Thompson had apologized, there was still a quiet tension between them. Every time Marcus walked into her classroom, he couldn't help but wonder if things were truly okay between them. Would she treat him the same way again, or was she just being polite because his father was the principal? Word of the incident soon began to spread around the school. The students in Miss Thompson's class had heard what happened, and some of them started talking about it in whispers. Marcus wasn't sure how much everyone knew, but it seemed like the story was making its way through the halls. Some students whispered to each other in the hallways, glancing over at Marcus, while others gave him nods of approval. It was clear that his actions had caused a ripple effect throughout the school. However, not everyone was supportive. Some students felt uncomfortable with the whole situation, unsure of who was right or wrong. A few of them had even made comments suggesting that Marcus should have just let it go, that it wasn't a big deal. But Marcus didn't agree. He knew that standing up for himself was the right thing to do. It wasn't just about one comment. It was about showing respect and ensuring that everyone felt welcome at school. Principal Anderson, aware of the growing conversations around the incident, called a school-wide meeting a few days later. The students gathered in the gymnasium, chatting and looking around at each other, curious about what the meeting would be about. Marcus sat in the middle of the crowd, his stomach in knots. His dad had made it clear that he was going to address the situation, but Marcus wasn't sure what kind of message the principal would send to the rest of the school. When Principal Anderson walked onto the stage, the gym fell silent. He stood at the podium, his calm and steady voice filling the space. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. "I want to take a moment to address something important that has come to my attention over the last few days." Marcus felt his heart race. He wasn't sure if this was going to be a lecture about the importance of respect or a discussion about how everyone needed to get along. Either way, he knew it was about to affect the entire school. "As many of you know," Principal Anderson continued, "there was an incident recently involving one of our teachers and a student. I want to remind everyone that we are a community here at Greenfield Middle School, and that means treating each other with kindness, understanding, and respect." Marcus looked around the gym as Principal Anderson spoke. Some students were nodding in agreement, while others were listening carefully. It felt like everyone was hanging on his dad's every word. "I also want to make it clear," Principal Anderson said, his voice strong, "that no one should ever feel uncomfortable or disrespected in this school. We are committed to creating a safe environment where everyone feels valued and heard." As the meeting continued, Marcus felt a sense of relief. His dad was making it clear that this wasn't just about him. It was about making sure the school was a place where everyone was treated fairly. Marcus realized that his decision to speak up had sparked something bigger than just his own situation. It had started a conversation about respect, equality, and how important it was to stand up for what's right. By the end of the meeting, Marcus felt proud. His dad had made sure that the whole school understood the importance of kindness and respect. As students filed out of the gym, Marcus couldn't help but feel that things at Greenfield Middle School might be different from now on. The road to change wasn't easy, but it had begun. Marcus had played a part in making his school a better place, and that made all the difference. As the days went on, things began to settle down at Greenfield Middle School. The incident with Miss Thompson and Marcus was still fresh in everyone's minds, but it had sparked an important conversation about respect and kindness. Students seemed to be more aware of how their words and actions affected others. Even though the tension had been high for a while, Marcus could see small changes happening around him. Marcus was still nervous every time he walked into Miss Thompson's class, but slowly things started to feel less awkward. Miss Thompson's behavior toward him was different now. She smiled more often, and when she spoke to him, her tone was kind and respectful. Marcus could tell that she was trying, and that made him feel a little better. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He had seen her apologize, and that had meant a lot to him. It wasn't always easy to admit when you were wrong, but Miss Thompson had done that, and Marcus respected her for it. At lunch, Marcus noticed that more students were sitting together, having conversations, and getting to know each other. The cliques and groups that had been so noticeable at the beginning of the school year were starting to blur. There was a sense of unity growing among the students. It wasn't just because of what had happened with Miss Thompson. It was because the message his father had shared about respect and kindness had touched everyone. One day, as Marcus was walking to his next class, Jamal caught up with him. "Hey, man," Jamal said, grinning. "I heard what your dad did at the assembly. He really made it clear that we need to be better to each other. I think it made a difference." Marcus smiled back, feeling proud. "Yeah, I think it did. People seem to be talking about it more. I mean, things aren't perfect, but it feels like we're heading in the right direction." Jamal nodded. "For sure. It's cool that you spoke up. I don't think everyone would have done that. You made people realize that we have to treat each other better." Marcus felt a sense of pride in his heart. He had done something difficult, something that had made him uncomfortable, but it had been the right thing to do. He had spoken up not only for himself, but for everyone who might have been treated unfairly. As the weeks went by, Principal Anderson continued to make sure that the school was fostering an environment of inclusion and understanding. He held workshops and discussions with the teachers and staff, reminding them of their responsibility to treat every student with respect. The teachers, including Miss Thompson, became more aware of their words and actions, and the students began to follow their lead. For Marcus, things slowly returned to normal. His friendships grew stronger, and he felt more confident in himself. The experience had changed him in many ways. He had learned that standing up for what was right wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. It wasn't just about a single comment from one teacher. It was about creating a school environment where everyone felt welcome and respected. One afternoon, as Marcus was walking home from school, he saw his dad in the front office, talking to a group of teachers. Principal Anderson looked up and waved at him, and Marcus waved back. He smiled, feeling proud of his dad and what he had done for the school. It wasn't just about being the principal. It was about making a difference in people's lives. Marcus knew that the road ahead wasn't always going to be smooth. There would still be challenges, but he also knew that he had the strength to face them. He had learned that it was okay to speak up, and that change could start with just one person deciding to make a stand. As he continued walking home, he realized that he was no longer afraid. He had found his voice, and he knew he could make a difference, no matter how big or small.